of course, you should not rely solely on one index, but you also don't want to be timing the market. And when it comes to figuring out your market investments and your 401k as you get closer to retirement, what are we supposed to do in today's current climate? That
Pray.
is what
Pray. You just it's a really good time to brush off whatever your spiritual scripture is and pray, right, Heather?
Yep, that's it. I'm not with you. You're not wrong there. That's just many people would argue that's any given point in time in life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of prayer goes around my house.
There's that, and mine as well. This is financial advisor, retirement planner John Hicks. I'm Heather Branch, here to ask John, founder of J. Hagan Capital, insight onto how to improve your position as you get into your retirement years, taking all that money you've worked so hard to earn and save, making it now turn around and work for you. Particularly when it comes to our 401ks, we've said this over and over, probably the most utilized, most popular retirement savings tool in America, but very often mistaken as a retirement plan. Your 401k is a savings account. It is not a retirement plan. So how do we do better with it? You can always find us online anytime, retirementsolutionradio.com, or, of course, click on the links we've got posted in the show notes as far as getting in touch with John and his team about your specific case scenario. But let's talk about the market and the general broad position. An article on marketwatch.com says that if your 401k is mostly following the S&P 500, it is time to diversify with the uncertainty of the Trump White House. And this is something you've talked about. This is not about politics. You mentioned Trump 1.0, his first run in the White House. There was a lot of market uncertainty. So what are we going to get in Trump 2.0? Let's talk about that. Also, tariffs, inflation, and the Fed's response to inflation. This article is recommending against depending solely on an index and said during times like this, those who use energy and commodities tend to do well. But John, I mean, if we have an energy sector fund in our 401k, I mean, just considering that, make us market timers, which we've also talked about. You never want to be that. Let's break all this down.
So it's interesting. So if you look back at the last 15 or so years, I mean, if you had energy funds or international funds or bond funds, they've been horrible investments compared to the S&P 500. And so the crazy thing is so everyone's like, oh, well, they haven't done that well. Why don't I just put everything in the S&P? I see people every day that's kind of what they're doing. They may have like 5 or 6 funds, but they're almost all tracking the S&P 500. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? And so we talked about this, I believe, in one of the last segments we did. We were talking that, Goldman Sachs has recently issued a survey, and they basically say, hey, we think that the market's only going to average around 2.5% to 3%. Not because we think things are bad, but just because if you have the kind of run up that we've had, chances are it just all comes out in the wash, right? That's where you have the average returns. So Goldman Sachs thinks 3%, and then we talked about the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Robert Shiller, and Shiller thinks that based on today's prices, the market's only going to average about 1.6%, guys, for the next decade. So here, it all comes to the question. So if we're looking at our 401k or IRAs or our portfolios and we're thinking, man, I got so much money that's been doing so great because it's been in the S&P 500. The question is that the right place to be now? And this article that came out says maybe not. Maybe not. Even though international did poorly in the past, even though bonds did poorly here recently, even though commodities have not been as good, and even though energy has not been as good, maybe it's time to own some of that stuff. So let's unpack that for a second, right?
Okay.
So there's a few really great strategies that exist out there for diversification. They're called all-weather portfolios, right? And they're not all the same. It's not one specific set of guidelines that everyone should own, but it basically says you need a percentage of your money in United States equities, potentially some in international. You need some in bonds, or in this current environment, I would say U.S. Treasuries are probably better, but they talk about those things. But they almost always add commodities, precious metal, energy, and managed futures. Now, the majority of people I talk to, they don't have a whole bunch of commodities or precious metals or managed futures in their portfolio. Is that bad? To be perfectly honest, you would have made more money had you just been in the S&P 500. But the question is that where we should be now, right?
Yeah.
And here's my context. My context is this. If we really think about where the markets are right now, and guys, they're a little expensive. As a matter of fact, Professor Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize, he says the market's around 41% more expensive than it should be. Now, is he predicting a 40% crash? No, not necessarily. He just says, hey, in order for things to catch up, the market's probably just going to stink for a while, potentially. Now, what's the other thing it could do, Heather? It could just crash. If it went down 40% tomorrow, then what does that mean? Well, then it's priced right. Then we could probably see 6, 7, 8, 9% market gains over the next several years. So this is that interesting thing. So, but one of the things that I want to make sure we all understand is if we're getting closer to retirement, right? If we're 3 to 5 years away from retirement, or we're already retired, we need some diversification. We do need some managed futures. I think in 2024, averaged around 20 to 23% returns. Not bad. The year before that, in 23, they did double-digit returns. And here's the crazy thing. Managed futures in 2022, was it right? Yeah, 22, when the market was down and bonds were down, actually was positive in that year too. So they've been pretty good to hold up on in our portfolios for some diversification and to kind of help out. Now, will they always do great? Probably not. And when they've still been dilutive to the returns of your portfolio, yeah. Does that matter to me? No. Because the whole point about getting to retirement is you want to be able to retire and quit having to work. So we need our portfolios to work for us. So you really need to kind of look at your portfolio. What kind of things do you have to hedge? Because there are many periods of time, Heather, many. There are 3 recent periods of time that we can bring up. One was from 1965 to 1981. And during that time period, the stock market, did you put $1 in 1965? By 1981, you had less than $1 when you actually figured in inflation. Not very good. On top of that, you had the dot-com bust, right? 2000 to 2012, that 12-year period, hookah, no returns. You actually lost money if you factor in inflation. And of course, before then, we actually had the Great Depression, 1937 and 1947. So these are long periods of time. 10-plus year periods. There was 10 years, 16 years, and more recently 12 years where if you put the money in the market, you would have made no money. As a matter of fact, lost money. Now think about retiring when the market is not doing what we want it to do. Think about retiring and all of a sudden you're trying to pull money from your portfolio, but not only is it not giving you positive returns, it's losing you money. See, guys, this is why we need to look at some of these things, potentially like energy or commodities, because during those same time periods, if you'd had some money in some energy, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about oil and gas primarily. There's many other things. I don't know, because I don't know how much solar and wind power the current administration is going to really throw money at. Chances are I'd kind of stay away from that. But if you look historically at gas and oil and gas, those actually performed really, really, really well during those 3 time periods I just mentioned, where there's 10 to 12 to 16 years of time period. As a matter of fact, between 1937 and 1947, if you'd invested in energy, you'd have been up over 40% on your money.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then during that middle period, right, from 1965 leading into right when Reagan took office, you would have doubled your money. You would have doubled money in energy. And frankly, here's the big one, the dot-com bust. When the dot-com bust happened and fell apart between 2000 and 2012, energy funds would have tripled your money during that period, see? And a lot of people I talk to, they don't own these things. And I'm not suggesting everyone go run energy funds. Who knows what they're going to do going forward, especially when we're talking about tariffs and we're talking about, America first. I like America First concepts, but if we're not getting cheap oil from Canada anymore and refining it here, I don't know what that's going to do to the oil industry, right? But we have to find those things to balance it out. Managed futures, gold, oil. I don't love cryptocurrency. I'm just not a crypto guy. Does that mean it won't go up? No. But we probably need something to diversify from the S&P 500. Those are the big ones, in my opinion.
Okay. So thinking then for somebody who is getting into retirement, again, we don't want to time the market, but because I think you brought up the point that you've seen a lot of people that are heavily, if not like solely invested in the S&P, at least in their 401k, because that's what we've been told for a long time, right? Get in the S&P, you'll be good.
And a lot of people say, well, John, I own more than just the S&P. Guys, if you look at all those Vanguard funds, how much overlap is there? There is a tremendous amount of overlap from this Vanguard fund to this Vanguard fund, or the same thing with Fidelity. If you pulled out 10 Fidelity large cap funds, they almost all are the same. It's like 85% similarities between all these funds. So even though you may have 23 different funds, you may own almost 90% of the same stuff, right? That's the whole thing. So, because I hear people say, well, John, I don't just own the S&P 500. You kind of do. So we just want to be careful, right?
Is that something, because we talk about all the time, right? If you're 59 and older, you come in offering you a portfolio review complimentary. Is that something that you can lay out for people? You discover for people in this review process. You say, okay, yes, you think you're diversified because you own these however many different commodities, these different funds, but actually you have all of this overlap. Is that something you can show to people?
We do that all the time. You know, it's crazy because I'll have someone come in and they literally will have like a whole page of actual investments.
Yeah.
But when you analyze it and kind of do an X-ray, if you will, 81%. There was a lady that came in the other day. She had about $1.3 million. I think she had like 23 different funds. She looked on paper, literally on paper, like she was well diversified. Yeah. Heather, she had 81% correlation, 81% overlap. All of those funds basically owned 81% of the same stuff. The only things that were slightly different is that some of them were balanced, and so they had some bonds in there, some treasuries or things like that. That's a lot of overlap. So she basically dumped 90% of those funds and probably owned one or two Vanguard or Schwab funds. She would have accomplished the exact same thing, probably reduced her costs tremendously, and been able to understand the investments better, right? So it's not always just about what can you make the most money from. It's like, hey, can you understand it? Because instead of owning 23 funds, wouldn't it have been nicer just to own two? And then and they will perform almost the same way and be cheaper.
Reduce your risk.
Of course, reduce risk, be cheaper, make it easier to understand. Come on. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking for in the long run.
And also, one other thing I want to point out as far as understanding, we talk about the age 59 and a half because people will come to you with a 401k. And how many people don't realize when you turn 59 and a half, you can actually roll your 401k, even at your current employer, correct me if I'm wrong, into your own IRA. And that gives you essentially, I mean, nothing's 100%, but freedom as far as how you are invested. You have a lot more choices, right? So you
absolutely, and I can't remember the year.
As far as risk.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the year, but like WorldCom, Enron, they all went out of business. And so the government changed the rule and said, hey, if you're still in service at your company, you don't have to leave it. But if you're in service, they called it an in-service withdrawal. You're still working there, but you're over 59 and a half. They give that worker the ability to take that 401k and roll it into their own self-directed IRA. Now, why do we like that? Because then you have control. You don't have to rely on that 401k company being switched around or them changing all your investments up or whatever. You get total flexibility and control to own the cheapest stuff like Vanguard or Schwab or Fidelity, whatever your preference is. But you can own it and you can be basically in charge of your fees, expenses, and frankly, guys, you can hedge it. You can put stop losses in there. You can use options to protect you on the downside. You can almost never do that in 401ks, but you can in an IRA. And of course, you pay no taxes in making that transition as long as you do a conversion. It's very, very easy. And it happens all the time. But if you're over 59 and a half, that's probably the first time you should probably think about, would you like to have more control of your own money? Because you can, by law, do that as soon as you're ready.
I think that most smart Americans that are hard workers, hard savers, would like to have more control. It's their money.
They should want to. I mean, it's obvious the government has no flipping clue what they're doing with your money. So at least, and of course, if we can help people go from 23 funds down to 2, chances are you'll understand your money better, so you can make better decisions with it, right?
That's, of course, the goal of every single plan that you create at J. Hagan Capital, working to help people understand, offering education, offering increased financial freedom, more control over your money. This is the point of having a 401k X-ray, which they can do for you at J. Hagan Capital. So if you want to begin that conversation, understand what your options are, getting that education, find us at retirementsolutionshow.com.